never spoken in public, so I'm happy to do this. GT is known so much for things that you have read and the way you know him, but he's also an outstanding family person. He is a great husband, father. He makes special choices to be with his kids, father growing up, and son, uncle, grandfather, all that stuff. Family is very important to him, and he does a great job of that. So, in this, he came to have. He was a Boy Scout here a few years ago, Troop 73. Yes, lots of meetings here and campouts, and he went on to be an Eagle Scout. But here, I will let you hear from GT.
Thanks, Mom. I said she's going to introduce you. I was like, she literally did. About 47 years ago. Well, it's great to be back. A year makes a big difference. I can tell you, when you're the mayor, you're constantly juggling all these invites that you get to speak and so many places you need to be, and trying to balance all that and still run the city and make good decisions. And then when you're the ex-mayor, you're just so grateful when anybody cares what you have to say about anything. And all I had to do to get this invite was know the Pope. So I'm glad that's the bar. But I'm really excited to talk with you about this today, because it is such a unique moment for our community here in Tulsa to have this direct relationship with the Pope as a community that really is rooted in the Augustinian order that has been here for almost 100 years now. And so what I want to talk today with you about is the Augustinian order itself, its role here in Tulsa, and its role in the world. And I want to tell that story really through the lives of two different people. One of them is Father Ted Tack, who grew up here in Tulsa and led Cascia Hall, led the Augustinians around the world, was a mentor to Pope Leo. And the other person I'm going to talk about, of course, is the Pope. But I want to paraphrase Father Tack. There's a wonderful talk that he did at Villanova about 15 years ago about St. Augustine. It's on YouTube. And I was watching it about a month ago. And he starts out, and I'm going to paraphrase him what he said, but he started out and he said, I want to be very clear. I am an amateur in the root meaning of that word. That is, I am a lover of St. Augustine without making any pretenses to being an expert, which of course is totally classic Father Tack, because he was one of the world's foremost experts on St. Augustine. But that root of the word amateur, rooted in amor, or ama in Latin, love, that's what I am when it comes to the Augustinians. I love the Augustinian order. It had a huge influence in my life. I make no pretense to be an expert on it, but I'm going to share with you what I know about the Augustinians as somebody who loves them like family. Just so you understand my affiliation with it, I went to Cascia Hall for middle school and high school, which the Augustinians operate. I then went to Villanova University in Philadelphia, which is the Augustinians' foremost institution of higher education. By the time I graduated from college, I'd actually spent most of my life in Augustinian schooling. And to this day, I work closely with the Augustinians. I actually have a Bible study, a virtual Bible study this afternoon with the Augustinians. So, and my birthday, it's just meant to be, my birthday is literally St. Augustine's feast day, August 28th. Of course, the Augustinian order, it all starts with St. Augustine. He was born in 354. He was a Roman citizen, but actually an African. You think about the Roman Empire at that time, it was all around the world. St. Augustine grew up in Africa and lived most of his life in Africa. He was raised as a Christian, but as a young boy, he was very early on identified as being brilliant, to the point that his parents were not very affluent, but there was sort of a local major business leader, if you will, at the time, who recognized this local kid as being brilliant and paid for him to go away and be schooled at a boarding school. And he grew up in that era being recognized around the world as a master of rhetoric. So being able to apply philosophy in an open forum and talk and debate with people. That took him away from Africa, actually took him to Italy. And as he was growing up, he actually went through, while he was raised as a Christian, he went through many different religious ideologies in his young adulthood. He became one of the most famous academics in the Roman Empire in Milan, but he also had a concubine. He had a son with that concubine. He, to put it perhaps irreverently, liked the ladies. And to the point that as he was getting older and realizing that, and he had a remarkable mother who never lost faith in wanting her son to be a Christian, who prayed fervently for it, never gave up on him, always kept coming back to him. And eventually, later on, she didn't know this when she died, but she's now a saint, Saint Monica, and honored in the church. But St. Augustine, as he was growing older, he realized that he wanted to be a good Christian, but he struggled with the realities of what that meant with, in particular, his lust. And he actually had a famous prayer, which I'm sure he doesn't appreciate that it's famous, but it's been passed down through the years. It goes, it's very simple. It's, God grant me chastity, but not yet. And he has many other great sayings as well, but that. So he's in Milan as this master of rhetoric, and the bishop of Milan at the time is Ambrose of Milan, later Saint Ambrose. And Ambrose was a remarkable leader in his own right, an incredible preacher, an incredible master of rhetoric. In fact, so St. Augustine, interested in this, mostly from an intellectual standpoint of kind of like, I want to check out the competition. I want to go see what this guy's all about. Starts attending the church where St. Ambrose speaks and develops a relationship with him, becomes incredibly close with St. Ambrose. He would later refer to St. Ambrose as really his adopted father. And one day into this relationship with St. Ambrose, and he's again struggling with this desire to be a good Christian, but not being able to do the things that he felt a good Christian should do. And he has this sort of moment of crisis where he's talking with his friends and he realizes what he wants to do, but he just keeps failing and failing and failing. And he goes out into the garden of this house where he is, and he's crying under this tree with frustration. And he hears a child say over and over again, tolle lege, which means take and read in English. And so later he realizes there were no children in the area. Like, he doesn't know, for the rest of his life, he never knew where that voice came from. But he immediately goes into his study in the house and just opens the Bible to the very first passage that he sees. And it's Paul's letter to the Romans, 13 through 14. not in reveling and drunkenness, not in lust and wantonness, not in quarrels and rivalries. Rather, arm yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ. Spend no more thought on nature and nature's appetites. And that was the moment of his conversion. He later said, and it's especially a famous quote among the Augustinians, I love it. He said, it's in his book, and he has a whole book about, it's one of the most famous books in all of history, the Confessions of St. Augustine, which is about his conversion experience. And he says, our hearts, he's talking to God, he says, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. Now, St. Augustine's whole life was about change, about pursuing truth. And while he always went through a lifelong conversion experience, as I think any of us do, there were things about him that didn't change, things about his personality. In particular, he pursued truth relentlessly as best he could identify it. His biographer says he himself was constantly changing. He was never afraid to change his mind if he was convinced that someone else or a different philosophy was right. And that led him in a roundabout way back to the Christian faith, but ultimately it made him a master of it because he understood it better than he would have if he had just absentmindedly followed it without thinking it through. He was a great friend. I joke a bit about his love for women, but his capacity for loving others was tremendous. And it was very important to him, especially after his conversion experience, that he wanted to start living with other Christians in a community of faith where they could study and learn together. And for the rest of his life, he was never alone. It was always very important to him to live in community and pursue truth together. And as I said, he was not a cold, analytical person. He was a passionate person filled with great love. He was, after his conversion, St. Ambrose baptized him. It was actually just 2 weeks ago in the church where he was baptized in Milan. It's incredible. And then he established that religious community of people who were not priests or bishops, but just wanted to practice the Christian faith. You have to understand, this is in the late 300s. Christianity is still in its early stages of growth and development. And so if you were going to practice in those days with your fellow Christians, you wanted to be together in a small group. And that's the group that St. Augustine formed and started living together. 4 years after his conversion and baptism, he became a priest. And 4 years after that, he was made a bishop and sent back to Africa, where he was a bishop for the rest of his life. Interestingly, as his biographer points out, St. Augustine is not remembered to this day because of his work as a bishop. He was a bishop, but he was one of, and remains, one of the foremost defenders of the Christian faith as a writer. And St. Augustine wrote over 100 books. The Confessions and the City of God are probably the two most famous that have never been out of print since then. He was famed as a preacher. He delivered between 6,000 and 10,000 sermons, but he did not write any of them down. The only ones that we still have today, we have about 500 of them, that is because stenographers happened to be in the audience and wrote down what he had to say. He died on August 28th, which is celebrated as his feast day. He was the Bishop of Hippo in Africa, and the city was actually under siege at the moment that he died. Vandals were attacking the Roman Empire in Africa, and when he died, they came in, they sieged the city, they burned the entire city that he had been the bishop of to the ground, except for his cathedral and his library, out of respect for him. So let's hear it for the Vandals, right? Yes. What nice guys. The Augustinian order, St. Augustine had written the rule of St. Augustine for the people that would live in his community. Even as a bishop, he always had people that lived with him. He didn't live by himself. The rule of St. Augustine really spells out in his own words that the purpose for that community is to live harmoniously in one mind and one heart intent upon God. The values of the order, which really stem, I think, from his personality, are truth, unity, and love. And these are all things that St. Augustine lived by and felt strongly about. As one Augustinian put it to me one time, the ideal of the order is doing God's work in a community of your friends. That even though Christianity is so much larger today than it might have been in St. Augustine's time, we can still work together with our friends to do God's work in the world. And the point is not to go off to some mountaintop and live by yourself and feel great about yourself. It is to be in the community, with the community, doing God's work in that community. The Augustinians here in the United States have 3 provinces, if you will. It's how the order is organized. And they are the operators of 2 institutions of higher education here in the United States. There's Villanova, which I'm a proud graduate of. Your national champions 2 of the last 6 years, I might add. The only university in the world with an NCAA championship and a pope. So we're pretty proud. And then Merrimack College, which is outside of Boston in Massachusetts. They also operate that. But here in the United States, there's 3 provinces, and it's basically a way of organizing the order's work here in the U.S. And there are provinces all around the world. So here in the United States, there's the St. Thomas of Villanova province, which is mostly the eastern United States. That's where Villanova is and things like that. There's the California province out on the West Coast. There's a lot of Augustinians out there. And then there's the Midwest province. This is really important for the rest of my talk today. Midwest province includes Tulsa. It also includes Chicago, where it is based. And then interestingly, it includes the Augustinians' missions in Peru. So you think about where the Augustinians are based, not necessarily the first thing you would think from a geographical standpoint, but that's the Augustinians, their work, it's in Chicago, Tulsa, and then down to Peru. The Augustinians came here to Tulsa actually 100 years ago this year. They were brought here by just a boy wonder of the order, Father Francis Driscoll. He was the president of Villanova at 31 years of age. He was a remarkable president of Villanova, but the order realized that they wanted to grow and they needed a presence in the central United States. And they wanted in particular to have a high school that could help them grow the awareness of the order and hopefully new priests somewhere in the central United States. And he looked at several different cities and ultimately honed in on Tulsa and founded Cascia Hall here in 1926. He would be the headmaster there at Cascia Hall for the rest of his life until he died in 1945. Father Driscoll had a great influence on the students of that era. 2 that are close to my heart would be my granddad, Bob LaFortune, and Father Tack. When you think about their generation, the greatest generation, they graduated in the class in 1944. Father Driscoll saw, at that time, Cascia was purely boys. He saw these boys graduate from Cascia and then immediately go to fight in World War II. And he wanted them to be prepared for that experience. He wanted them to have all the preparation they could to serve our country and come home at the end of the war. And so he created a training unit for the students, military training unit that would do drills every day. My grandfather was actually worked his way up. It was his first leadership experience. He worked his way up through that and ended up being the senior commander of this group. They would go down to Fort Sill and hearing my grandfather talk about this is crazy in retrospect, like no high school would do this today. But they would go and like have these kids climbing under barbed wire, shooting machine guns. And the group was called the Commandos. And that is why, if you ever wonder why Cascia Hall, their football team, the basketball team is the Cascia Hall Commandos, it's in honor of that group of students that Father Driscoll was putting through training so they could fight in the war and come home. Father Tack grew up here in Tulsa. I think I spoke about him last year as well. If I ever met a saint in my life, it was him. He was my grandfather's longest lived close friend. They grew up here together in Tulsa. They co-edited the very first Cascia Hall yearbook together. And they had really interesting parallel lives. Father Tack was actually accepted into Notre Dame and was planning to go there in his senior year of high school. He decided he wanted to be an Augustinian priest. And so he gave Notre Dame the Heisman and went to Villanova, which all of us Villanova grads are proud of. But he went, they both went to college. Kind of their lives took separate tracks. Father Tack went to Villanova and then the seminary. My granddad went to college and then served in World War II. My grandfather worked his way up through municipal government here in Tulsa and became the mayor of their shared hometown in 1970. Well, Father Tack was an educator for the Augustinians in Rome and actually worked his way up. My grandfather was elected mayor in 1970 here in Tulsa. My Father Tack was elected in 1971 at only 40, I guess at the time he was 43 years old, to be the worldwide leader of the Augustinians, the prior general. And he served in that role for 12 years and was credited by the Augustinians as a transforming, this is a quote, a transforming force in the life of the Augustinian order. He would travel 7 or 8 months of every year. He visited the Augustinians when he was their leader were in 42 countries. He visited 41 of them. The only one he did not go to was Czechoslovakia because the government there was anti-Christian, and Father Tack was concerned that if he went there and drew attention to the work of the Augustinians, that the government would crack down on them. So he did not go there. And I will put this in terms he may not appreciate. He was a saint magnet in his time. He worked with Saint Pope Paul VI. He traveled to India and worked and got to know Saint Mother Teresa. He went to Poland and got to know Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, who later became Saint Pope John Paul II. And he had a very special relationship with Cardinal Albino Luciani, who would stay with him anytime. He was the Cardinal of Venice. Anytime he came to Rome for meetings to Vatican, he would stay with Father Tack at the Augustinians Center there in Vatican City. And they were talking after Pope Paul VI died. He actually was staying with Father Tack the night before the conclave started, and they were talking. And Father Tack said to Cardinal Luciani, you know, you're going in there. You're the Cardinal of Venice. There's a chance like you could come out of this the Pope. And Cardinal Luciani laughed and he said, they don't make dumplings out of this kind of dough. And at that conclave, he became Pope John Paul I. And that was the story Father Tack always enjoyed telling because it showed his humility. When he left that role, he did not stay in Rome or insist on some big appointment. He came back to Tulsa to teach high school. And as one of those students who got to benefit from that, I can tell you his love of St. Augustine was contagious. His course on ethics was one of the most important parts of my formal education at any level. I've since told people, like, getting to take a class on St. Augustine from Father Tack was like getting to take high school physics from Albert Einstein. Like, the notion of it, it still blows my mind. He wrote books on St. Augustine, and any time that he would come to Villanova to speak there, we would get together. He was like a third grandfather for me. The greatest lesson that I learned from him was his example was the importance of humility. This was a man who led thousands around the world and served alongside saints. But when he left the global leadership of his order, he came home to do what he thought he could do best, which was teach young minds here in Tulsa. In his lectures that he gave on Augustinian spirituality, Father Tack explained that we cannot grow close to God without humility. Indeed, the very last words that he ever spoke on his deathbed were, "Lord, have mercy on me." This is the spiritual father of many people around the globe, and he thought himself a sinner and in need of grace until the very end. Now, I was not with Father Tack at his deathbed. The only reason that I know what his last words were is because I heard them from Pope Leo, who was. Father Tack was the prior general of the Augustinians when Robert Prevost was ordained as an Augustinian priest in Rome. I am confident Father Tack was there. I just can't find a picture of it. But regardless, they had a close relationship throughout their lives as brothers in the order and as, I think, from a mentor relationship. Their relationship was important enough that Father Bob, as many of us knew him at the time, even though he was the prior general over the Augustinians in the whole world, when Father Tack was dying, Father Bob was here in Tulsa at his bedside with him to comfort him. He led the Mass for Father Tack's funeral. In his eulogy for Father Tack, he said, "I have no doubt in saying that one of the reasons that Ted loved to teach Augustine, to read and study Augustine's writings, is that it is in St. Augustine that one can really understand the depth and breadth and height of human experience within which we can ultimately find the presence of God." And I think that statement says as much about Pope Leo as it does about Father Tack. Pope Leo's life has really been spent in three main places. Chicago, where he grew up, Peru, where he grew in the priesthood as a missionary, and Rome, where he was just continually promoted through a series of roles in the church. He grew up in Chicago, decided early on, like Father Tack, that he wanted in high school, that he wanted to be a priest. He actually went to a boarding school for boys who were considering the priesthood, went on to Villanova, where he majored in math. And as an Augustinian from Chicago, he's always been part of the Midwest province, which we are part of. That's also important because when he became a priest, deciding where he was going to go, he wanted to do missionary work, so he went to the Augustinian missions in Peru. He began his priestly ministry there, and he later said that Peru was the part of his ministry that most shaped his life. Very early on, he developed a crucial concept of leadership, which he wrote down. There is no room in Augustine's concept of authority for one who is self-seeking and in search of power over others. His work in Peru very much focused on extending Christ's presence into the daily lives of others, making sure that they had the basic essentials for survival, helping educate and form new priests, building churches, and in several cases, saving women from human trafficking by finding them better sources of employment. He became adept at repairing, you don't even think about this. He became really good at repairing vehicles that the church needed to use to get around Peru, and later joked that he spent as much time on auto repair as he did on preaching. And after more than a decade in that work, he was elevated to be what's called the prior provincial. So that's like the head of the Augustinians in the Midwest province in Chicago, Tulsa, and Peru. That's when he served on the board here at Cascia Hall. And after only 2 years of doing that, he was elected prior general for the Augustinians, Father Tack's old job, and he moved to Rome. He was served well in this job by his ability to speak fluently, not just English, but Spanish, Italian, French, and Portuguese. He traveled extensively as prior general. One of the people that he got to know in those travels was the Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires, Jorge Bergoglio. And they hit it off personally, but they didn't always agree on issues of policy, to the extent that when Cardinal Bergoglio became Pope Francis, Father Bob told one of his friends, "Thank God, now I'm never going to become a bishop." But when his service as prior general ended, Pope Francis named Father Prevost the Bishop of Chiclayo in Peru. And he was happy to return to that country where he actually holds dual citizenship. and he returned to the leadership style that he'd employed as a priest. He focused on addressing the needs of those he served. During floods, he could be seen in rubber boots helping people move. During a food shortage, he ordered truckloads of chickens delivered to his diocese. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he ordered oxygen machines for those suffering from the worst cases of the illness. And this approach, as a bishop, as a true servant of those in his diocese, this was exactly in line with what Pope Francis wanted to see for the church all around the world. And so in January of 2023, Pope Francis named then Bishop Prevost. He called him back to Rome and named him the leader of the office. It's one of the most important offices in the church, the office that recommends bishops to serve all around the world to the Pope. And in one of his very last acts in his lifetime, Pope Francis elevated him to be a cardinal bishop, of which there are only 13 in the world. And so Pope Francis clearly saw something in this man that he wanted to see more of in the church. To those who know him, he is, who know Pope Leo, he is known as humble and modest. He doesn't dominate the conversation. He is known as a great listener. He has a reputation in the Augustinians and among business leaders who have worked with him as being very decisive once he has listened to all sides of an issue. He has a strong appetite for work. As his brother Augustinians in Rome have told me, he is always the first in the chapel in the morning, and when they go to bed at night, they will always see, or would always see, the light under his door on because he was still working late into the night. And I think those traits, holiness, humility, a brilliant mind, and a tenacious work ethic, are the reasons that he just kept getting promoted through the church, even though he was a man who would have been perfectly happy to live out his life doing missionary work in rural Peru. He is unique in that he has a true global knowledge of the church from 12 years traveling as the prior general of the Augustinians and then as the leader of the office that selects bishops. On a personal aside, I've been following his career for a quarter century. Ever since my friends in the Midwest province, we're just excited, they were excited, and I shared it, excited that a guy from the Midwest province got elected prior general of the Augustinians. I met him around Father Tack's funeral, and then I served with him on a committee that raises funds for retired Augustinians to support them in their retirement. And there was excitement at each stage of his career. There was excited that Father Bob became a bishop. We have an Augustinian bishop. How exciting. And then a cardinal. Wow, that's amazing. But I never had any inkling that he would become the Pope. And not because he's not a remarkable man, because he is, but because in the Catholic Church, there is historically been a prejudice against Americans in the conclave. Americans, we control enough. We don't need to be in charge of the church as well. And so when like the media would do reports on, the top leading candidates and they would include him in it, I thought, yeah, right. They're just saying that here so that Americans will pay attention to this process or click on a link. And I will say like that I've now, as an adult, there have been 3 of those conclaves and where you could watch it on TV. And to me, every time I get choked up when they show like the bells ringing in Rome and you see people, like it's this moment. Like there's lots of divisions in the Catholic Church and any church, but there's this moment where there's people all around the world who are so joyful and excited. And it is a beautiful thing to see. And so I was watching on TV, listening to the Latin, and I thought I knew who it was going to be and was wrong, to the extent that they say in Latin, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it correctly, but they say Robert Francis. And I'm so dumb. I thought, wow, I didn't realize there was another cardinal other than Cardinal Prevost with Robert Francis as his first 2 names. How interesting. And then they say the last name, and I just couldn't believe it. But the very first thing that came to my mind when he stepped out onto that balcony was Father Tack, and thinking about all the Augustinians through history, starting with St. Augustine and that order through history and their work to pursue truth and unity and love, and how that led to this man from the United States, from our part of the country, who has ties to this city, becoming the Pope. And it was a remarkable moment. In Mass, the day after he became Pope, he echoed the same sentiment about authority that he had written down when he was a very young priest. Pope Leo said, he was talking about how those in authority in the church should not elevate themselves. Says, move aside so that Christ may remain, to make oneself small so that he may be known and glorified, to spend oneself to the utmost so that he may have the opportunity so that others may have the opportunity to know and love him. And I want to close with a quote that has not been widely circulated. I only saw it because a group of Midwest Augustinians went to his inaugural Mass, and then they went to visit him in the Apostolic Palace afterwards. And you have to understand, for him, like, these are his brothers. These are not just his fellow Augustinians. These are his best friends, his brothers. And they went to see him in the Apostolic Palace right afterwards. And thankfully, one of them, who's gutsier than me, pulled out his iPhone and videotaped the session. But this is what someone recorded that he said, and I saw the video. One of my friends posted it on his Facebook page. And this is what he said to his very closest friends and brothers. Our Lord continues to surprise all of us, to call all of us, invite all of us to have our restless hearts always open to receiving whatever the grace of God offers to us. It only asks for our generous response. So here we are, all together once again, seeking to do the Lord's will. I love that quote. Thank you very much for letting me talk today.
Will you take questions?
Sure.
Questions, anyone, please?
Oh, of course, Kim on the back row in a minute. I didn't wear my walking shoes. I wore my dress shoes.
St. Augustine, did he have contact with, this is the first question, with his son? And then the second one is, where in Africa did he go?
Great question. So where he lived today would be Algeria, so kind of northwest Africa. And his son tragically died. They were actually baptized together, and then his son died. It's a pretty wild story. I mean, in deciding that he was going to commit to Catholicism or Christianity, he was in Italy. He sent his concubine back to Africa and never saw her again. And then he and his son were both baptized by St. Ambrose, and then his son became ill within like a year or two and died. And then about 2 years after that is when he became a priest. His son, his name was Adeodatus, and that means something in Latin. I can't remember what it is. Yes, sir. And by the way, there's several great biographies. I highly recommend any of Father Tack's books. He wrote several about St. Augustine, both about St. Augustine and about how his teachings apply to life today. They're all wonderful. And then there's a great biography of St. Augustine by a man named Peter Brown that is also very good.
What do you see as the biggest problem facing the Catholic Church today?
I was hoping no one would ask that, so thanks. I can't wait for my pastor to watch this on YouTube. No. I think, and others have said this, and I thought about mentioning it, but I was mindful of time. So the Catholic Church, there are these two schools of thought, and you see it reflected in the last two popes. There is one school of thought that says we need to be a bulwark against the evils of the world. And so it's better for us to be a small, pure church. And I think there are many who would say, who were great supporters of Pope Benedict, who would say that that is an accurate statement, and that was kind of the track that he was advocating for. And then there's a different school of thought that Pope Francis really advocated for, which is, and he even wrote this. I just read, he published his memoir like 2 months before he died. It's probably one of my favorite books. But he talks in it, he says, a little tiny church that isn't impacting people is not what Jesus called us to build. And that the church should be going out into the world and saving as many souls as possible and granting mercy on sinners, not judging them. And if you can't tell by my characterization of the two, I happen to fall into the latter category. But I love Pope Francis. And his, in fact, when he was a bishop, Bishop Prevost, now Pope Leo, he wore the same pectoral cross that Pope Francis wore, which is, unlike a normal crucifix with Christ crucified on it, it's Christ, the Good Shepherd. He's carrying the lost sheep on his shoulders on that cross. It's beautiful. I actually wear a little version of it every day. But Pope Leo, I think many have said, there is hope that he can reconcile the differences between those two schools of thought. And that his experience and the belief that many, especially in the College of Cardinals, had, that this is someone who listens to all sides, who doesn't make decisions rashly, that tries to build consensus through truth, unity, and love, those Augustinian values, that this is someone who can reconcile these two schools of thought as to what direction the Catholic Church should take, where, yes, we do need to stand for something and to be a holy church, but we also need to be one that has compassion and mercy for sin and speaks to the greatest challenges that everyday people face in their lives. And how do you bring those two together? And so I think that is the great challenge. There are many others, fiscal challenges that speak to that, but I think the core great challenge is that mission. And I have confidence in him, but I think that's the task before Pope Leo. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Any other softball questions?
Oh, well. Hold the phone. Going as fast as I can. You got to be on the tape.
I do. Read a lot of different conflicting reports the last few years. I grew up in the Lutheran Church and then the Methodist Church for many years. Is the Catholic Church in as steep a decline as other mainstream faiths are right now? And if so, what has the Pope addressed that, or has the order addressed that situation?
I think it depends on where in the world you're talking about. So, and Pope Francis actually placed a heavy emphasis on naming cardinals in particular, in seeing the growth of the Catholic Church in Asia and Africa is remarkable. And in Western Europe and the United States, it has been declining attendance and numbers. Now, what's interesting, just in the last, I would say, decade, there's been a resurgence of the Catholic Church among young people. And there's been a lot of writing just in the last year about, and not necessarily even just the Catholic Church, but Christianity in general, about young people being so turned off by the constant conflict in the public arena and wanting to find something that's larger than themselves, and finding that in faith, and in seeing a rebound in numbers in church attendance and participation among young people in Christianity in general, not just in the Catholic Church. But I really think it just, and that's why today the College of Cardinals that elected Pope Leo is the most universal college that has ever existed in the history of the church. I mean, historically, it was dominated in Italy, less so as, Pope John Paul and Pope Benedict, and then definitely with Pope Francis, appointed more people from around the world to reflect the growing numbers of Catholics around the world, not just in Western Europe. And so that, again, I think is one of the reasons that you saw someone with experience all around the world, like Cardinal Prevost had, rise to the top when it came time to select someone who'd be the leader of the global church.
I'm ready to walk. Anybody else? Oh, Marvin, I knew you would do it. He's on the back row. That's why I was back there a minute ago. But hang on, Marvin. Here I come. Next time, I'm going to wear my running shoes.
I want to thank you for a great talk, but then I do have a question. Given the political environment in the United States right now, why has the Catholic Church not taken any kind of an active stance against some of the inequities that we see in our government? And is there any, not only the Catholic Church, but all churches seem to be staying very neutral about taking any kind of position?
I think it would depend on which issue you might be talking about. I know that the Conference of Catholic Bishops have been very outspoken, in particular in defense of immigrants. And you've seen bishops going and standing alongside immigrants who are going and applying for citizenship and visas. And so I don't know that I see the church shying away from these issues. I think it depends on who the messenger is. So here in the United States, you're going to see bishops speaking up more on issues than you might see the Pope on a given issue, because the Pope is having to, on any given day, speak on something that's happening anywhere in the world. But I've at least, and again, I'm just a GT Bynum who works at St. Francis. I have no official role in the church whatsoever, other than a devoted son of the faith. But I've not seen that shying away from things.
Oh, whoa.
St. Francis. Tell us about your position at St. Francis and how it evolved and how you see it evolving. And you're talking to your peers here. You're talking to your customers. And this group of people here would be your best customers. So sell us on St. Francis and tell us how you.
Oh, finally. Thank you. No, so my role at St. Francis, we had, St. Francis for the last 60 years has been focused on building this marvel of healthcare. And I did not appreciate it really until I started working there, how unique it is in the healthcare world. One, again, I was furious as mayor. I did not know this. The hospital at 61st and Yale is the 11th largest hospital in the United States. It's the largest Catholic hospital in the country. And I was like, I told our marketing team, I was like, why did no one tell me this as mayor? Like, if we had the largest Catholic university, you'd see it on banners at the airport. And they don't like to brag. So I will brag. It has been rated the number one hospital in Oklahoma 9 straight years now. was recently named, the health system named one of the 15 best health systems in America. Largest private sector employer in the eastern half of Oklahoma. And the thing that, and right now, investing over $700 million to expand the South Campus and to expand the new campus, or the campus in Muskogee, and at Laureate to expand the number of healthcare or mental health care beds that are available there for our community. And the reason the system is able to do all of this is because it is a true Oklahoma-based nonprofit. There are no stockholder dividends because there are no stockholders. There's no home office that money's getting sent to prop up other hospitals somewhere else. Everything that St. Francis generates stays here in Oklahoma. And it holds, by the way, zero debt. Literally not paying down debt. Everything goes back to just providing great care for patients. Now, we had a CEO come in a few years ago who's led health systems in other states around the country, and he recognized that, yeah, I mean, what is built here is one of the best in the world. But there are other things that we can be doing in the communities we serve to help address issues before people have to come to us to get help. And so he approached me about 2 years ago, said, we want somebody to lead our work in the communities we serve. And I was like, I don't know anything about healthcare. And he's like, we don't want somebody who knows all about healthcare. That's not the job. We want somebody who understands work in communities, who can work with community partners to improve overall public health and address great public health challenges. We think you're the guy, and we'll wait until you leave office. You don't have to tell me today, but we just know you're going to get lots of offers, and we want you to know we were here first. And I did have a number of very flattering offers, but I think the capacity of the St. Francis Health System to make a positive impact in Eastern Oklahoma is greater than just about any other organization out there. And so my job is basically split into two pillars. One, I lead our team that is developing our overall plan to work with other hospitals and nonprofits on how we can play a greater role in the communities we serve, whether around things like access to healthy food, access to adequate housing, access to good mental health care, all these things that aren't just inside the walls of the hospital, but are out in the communities. And so I lead the team that is focusing on building that plan, and then we'll execute it over the next 3 years. And then the other half of my job is I do all the government affairs for the health system. They did not have anybody in-house who was in charge of their government affairs, which when you think of an organization the size of St. Francis, it's pretty remarkable. But we're heavily regulated. Healthcare is heavily regulated and impacted by decisions that are made in Oklahoma City and DC. And so I spend a lot of time in Oklahoma City and DC making sure that our legislators, our governor, our congressional delegation, they understand from our vantage point as an entity that only wants to serve the people of Oklahoma, here's what we need and what we're seeing as it relates to any particular piece of legislation that comes up. So that's kind of my day-to-day work in those two spaces. But I would just say, and I'd say this even now that I know it, and that's the greatest frustration for me, is to learn all these things after I started working there rather than when I was the mayor. And I had Mayor Nickles out there this week so I could drill this stuff into his head so he doesn't have to wait until he's out of office to find out about it. It's an unbelievable system, and we are so fortunate here in Tulsa that you've had decades of community leadership that has built that system up, and that it exists solely to serve the people of our community.
Any chance you'd get back in politics, maybe as a U.S. Senator from Oklahoma?
Not anytime soon. My wife, her go-to line is, she is keeping me as busy as possible so that I do not think about running for office. She likes not having to worry when it snows. being able to go on vacation with our kids and not worry about getting a call that I need to go back home. So no, I think any of us, we have moment like I did, at the risk of perhaps being too self-referential here. Like I absolutely felt a calling to run for mayor in 2016. I felt that was, and I don't like it when politicians say, God told me to do this, but I felt like that was what God wanted me to do. I have no sense right now that God wants me to get into politics. He wants me at St. Francis.
Let's thank GT for being here with us. Thanks.
Thank you very much.